What's up? My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydiRtDFS.com. And today, or as we would usually do, like Mondays with McCool, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I wanted to do a 2024 in review, not only of Paydirt itself, but also of the DFS industry and the sports betting industry as well, since we can kind of lump those two things in together. If you have not tuned into this before, I have done 2024 review, or not 2024 reviews, but yearly reviews in the past. And a lot of what I want to talk about are things that are not necessarily specific to how to play DFS or specific on how to do those things, but more of a look overall at the industry and where things currently are, where I think things are going to be going, and kind of how Paydirt is going to approach those things. So if you are interested in those things, then this stream is for you. I'm also happy to take questions across the line of, what I think about different things within the industry, different trends, different companies, stuff like that. Happy to have that transparency on this. So we're going to be talking a little bit from a high level about the industry overall, things that happened, trends that happened, tech advancements, stuff like that. And then we're going to relate that over into Paydirt and kind of how Paydirt is looking at in 2024 and then moving into 2025. So let's go ahead and get that started. So when we think about 2024, I think that we'll start overall with kind of like the state of the industry and how I kind of view what is going on across DFS and sports betting. So first off, with the DFS and sports betting, let's talk about the differences between those two things. I think that DFS, from a game perspective and tech perspective, has taken some interesting steps forwards and backwards, whereas sports betting has obviously exploded in popularity, and we see a lot of interesting takes on the way to approach sports betting. But unfortunately, a lot of sports betting is managed by people who are actually really bad at it, but have more opportunities to act like they're good at it. So in DFS, when you talk about how good somebody is at it, and when you talk about how good somebody is at DFS and how much money they can make, there are metrics that we know that we can use to measure how good somebody is at DFS. We can measure not only their ROI across time, but we can also measure their finishing percentiles. We can measure how much ability they have to break down and analyze a slate. Like, there's a lot of different things we can do to analyze that kind of stuff. But by and large, what a lot of people do to think that a player is good is look at their screenshots, right? JBC, for instance, he posted $1 million screenshot yesterday. JBC is a very good player, but even if he wasn't a very good player, if anybody who posts $1 million screenshot is going to, people are going to think that they're really good at what they're doing, rather than, $1 million screenshot could just be one instance of EV expected across, a lifetime of DFS play. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is good or bad. People can run hot all the time. We saw a couple weeks ago in the Million Makers, somebody with a lineup that absolutely probably should not have won. But it did, because that's how things go in DFS. So the thing with DFS, though, is that those screenshots are relatively few and far between, right? Really good players are going to have more opportunities and more shots with their portfolios to get those kind of large wins and windfalls and show off those kinds of things. But in the sports betting industry, it is much more frequent to see people who are posting, SGP wins and 100-to-1 wins and shit like that. I mean, it's rampant, right? But that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily mean anything about how good a bettor is. We were just talking shit to Gugs in the Discord, and those who have been in the esports department and have been in my Discord know Gugs. We were just talking shit to him because, like, he's on this insane heater about posting screenshots and $1,000 wins. And I was up 8K at 6 a.m. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. But we know that he's a losing bettor over time, right? Like, he's admitted to being a losing bettor. And just because he runs hot at some point during the year doesn't necessarily mean that he's good. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people should be following him for advice. But when people see that kind of stuff, they develop this kind of bias towards thinking that somebody is good at what they're doing when they're not. So we see a lot more of that and more opportunity for that in the sports betting industries, where that there is a lot more opportunity for people to grift people into thinking that they are good at things. We see other cappers in the industry that will go unnamed for now that, that they're not actually good bettors. They don't actually know what they're doing in terms of putting together a process, but because they're loud and because they, have a following from being in the industry for a long time, people think they're good at what they do when they're not. So that's kind of how I view the difference. One of the main differences between DFS and sports betting is that I think sports betting, there are a lot more instances where people can be led astray. DFS, we have a longer sample size and people don't have the opportunity to have hits as often. So I want to talk through a little bit of that. And on top of that, like the DFS industry in ways it has taken steps forward in 2024. We'll talk about the tech advancements here in a sec, but I think that also in a lot of ways it's taken steps backwards, or maybe worse, it has stagnated a little bit. I don't think that we are seeing large influxes of people coming into the game. And I think that that is evidenced by things like, Pick Six has raised the rake up to like 42% or something. And Pick Six is a pick'em game, but it's connected to DraftKings. And if DraftKings was doing very well with their customer acquisition, they wouldn't have to be raising rake up to 42% on any of their games, right? We have seen prize pools continue to grow, but I'm not sure that that's because there are more and more new players coming in. I think that the ecosystem just continues to evolve towards a point of maybe there's less new players, but the players who have been in are getting better faster and thus putting in more lineups and stuff like that. So I think that DFS is at kind of a weird point where it has to fight this battle of both customer acquisition and an easier game of sports betting. And so what we're going to see, I think, is usually when we talk about DFS as a game, we talk about it in quarters. And any given sport, the first quarter of the year for that sport is kind of wild, right? It's like the Wild West. The first 4 weeks of the NFL season, nobody fucking knows anything. And then for the meat of the year, for the second quarter and the third quarter of the year, that's where I think that the majority of good players end up doing very well, because you end up having some knowledge and some information to work off of. And then the last quarter of the year is just fucking, it's the grinders and it's the really good players, and not all of the dead money, but a lot of the dead money has dried up. People end up going broke that were new players who came in for the NFL season and stuff like that. But we end up seeing towards the end of the year, the edge has started to dry up quite a bit. And it's one of the reasons why I pretty much stopped playing the last 4 weeks of NFL season, or the last month of the MLB season, or the last month of the NBA season. It's because when we look at the way that the field has dried up over the course of the year, it's only the really good players playing towards the end of the year. So, all that said, that kind of dynamic where we have a lot of new, fresh money in the first 4 weeks, and then that money is trying to claw its way up in the middle of the season, I think that we likely see that consolidate a little bit if there are not as many new players coming in, right? I think that we see more and more that the end of year edge creeps farther and farther towards that middle. Maybe instead of me not wanting to play the last 4 weeks of the NFL season, maybe I don't want to play like the last 5 weeks. Maybe instead of me not wanting to play, any March or February NBA, maybe it moves forward into like the middle of January. Baseball season, maybe instead of having September be the time when I'm like, all right, fuck it, I really don't want to play MLB anymore, the edge just kind of dried up. Maybe that starts creeping into August. This is not like a doom and gloom thing to say that I think that DFS is dead or dying or whatever, because that's silly whenever people say that. But I do think that it is worth noting that if there are less new players coming into the ecosystem, then that new money edge is not going to be as prevalent. And so in relation to sports betting, that kind of thing doesn't really matter for us, right? Like we're playing against the house edge. However, it does matter to the house, right? So if there are, and I don't think this happens for a while, but if there are less new players coming in and joining sportsbooks, then sportsbooks will have to tighten their belts more and more. And we're already seeing them tighten their belts quite a bit because it's a much easier game to beat. I say all the time, anybody can make $1,000 a month sports betting. Like literally anyone can do it. With the right tools and all that kind of stuff. But if there are less new players making accounts on sportsbooks and there are less people who are following these shitty SGPs, then sportsbooks have to make up that difference somewhere, right? Like they have less new money edge to exploit on their own behalf to try to beat the players who are actually really good at sports betting. So that, while it doesn't affect us directly, it affects us indirectly as really good players. We do have to worry about that a little bit. Let's see. Completely agree, James. Everyone shows their wins, but you never see their losses. Transparency is everything. I mean, it is, and that's why I'm doing this stream today, is from a transparency standpoint. And we'll talk about Paydirt and like from a really, really transparent standpoint here in a little while. But it's not in the best interest of a lot of the companies to be transparent, or a lot of the cappers to be transparent, right? If all of the companies and cappers were transparent, then they wouldn't be able to make a living. The vast majority of them, because they don't show their work and they don't show that they're actually winning or losing some amount of money, right? They'd rather just shame people into thinking that they are good. And when people call them out, call them, fucking names or whatever, and kick them out of the Discord. When you get time, could you talk about how to combat clumping and optimizers? Blender did a show on the pregame, but I can't find it anywhere. Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk a little bit about the tech stuff here in a bit. But now that we've talked kind of a little bit about the DFS and sports betting industries and their growth, I think that sports betting is going to continue to grow. It's not even legal in all 50 states. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of interest in it. I think that younger people like sports betting a little bit more in DFS right now. And like I said, it's an easier game. So I think we see sports betting continue to grow and continue to increase the player base, whereas DFS, I think that growth is likely going to stagnate or plateau over the next couple of years. That doesn't mean that DFS is dead, and it doesn't mean that sports betting is the thing that we should be focusing on, because they're completely different concepts and different edges. But it is worth saying that I think that there's going to be a significant focus on sports betting and pick'em games from a lot of companies moving into 2025. So with that said, let's kind of talk a little bit about what the industry focused on and what the tech advancements were, I think, from 2024. So the big thing, obviously, is contest sims for DFS. Well, we'll do a DFS side and then a sports betting side. So for the DFS side, the biggest thing is contest sims. And back in 2022, the later part of 2022, I was developing contest sims for baseball. But I was just running them locally, right? And it was more of an idea and less of like a full-blown thing. Little did I know the entire industry was doing the same thing. And then in 2023, everybody basically pushed contest sims at the same time. And it was like this weird, it was this weird coincidental timing where everyone ended up pushing contest sims right before the MLB season, and nobody had talked to each other about the fact that they were going to launch this product. So it kind of felt like, I think if you were looking from a third party or looking in the window, it kind of looked like everybody had talked about it and said, all right, we're all going to launch this shit. So let's just do it now. But nobody had talked about it. So it's kind of interesting. And in 2023, we saw, I think the vast majority of the company or the industry in DFS was not actually ready to launch their products. I know personally at Paydirt, like I had a product that I thought was good. And then after we started using it and after subscribers started using it, it turned out that it was not as good as I thought that it was going to be. But companies like Skotastic and the Solver, like they put out sim products that were not even really sim products, right? Like they were, what they were doing was they were simulating lineups against each other and then assigning an edge based on the portfolio rather than actually simulating a contest. And I think that we still see a lot of that. But I think that the math has gotten better across the industry when it comes to this contest sim stuff. And so I think that the base framework has certainly improved. In 2023, that the sim products were mostly bad up until NFL season. And specifically, up until NFL season, about week 9. That's when we kind of saw the inflection point of contest sims starting to really affect the way that DFS was played. I remember distinctly there was a Jonathan Taylor slate where Jonathan Taylor was projected to be like 33% owned or something, and Derrick Henry was projected to be 18% owned, but every single sim product said that Derrick Henry was under-owned and Jonathan Taylor was over-owned. And what happened was they completely flipped ownerships. Derrick Henry ended up 35%, Jonathan Taylor ended up 15%. And that was kind of the moment when I looked at things and I was like, shit, that's not good for the industry. And it has proven to not be good for the industry. It has made it so now things have stabilized a bit more. But even after stabilizing a bit, we still see these wild deviations from projected ownership across the industry on very specific kinds of plays. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, so I have a little bit of a lower voice. But it has caused ownership projections to be, while the correlation coefficients have mostly stayed the same or gotten better, what it has caused is a handful of players every single slate to end up jumping other groups of players and causing significant steam differences between players that are really fucking with the way that lineups are created. And it's this really fucked up snake eating its own tail situation, where as ownership projections get better and contest sims get better, ownership projections get worse, which then makes contest sims worse, right? Because the crux of a good contest sim is good ownership. So we've kind of hit this point now where any improvements to either side of the equation are going to make the entire thing worse. And that was the big advancement in 2024, was that things have continued to get better. And what that has led to is every single week you see on Mondays with McCool, Blender and I talk about 1 or 2 or 3 players that are just like, what the fuck is that ownership? It doesn't, if we'd have known that player X would be owned Y, we would never have played them, or we wouldn't have considered them near to the extent that we did. And we see that across the industry. So I don't think that there's a good answer to it. And I think that what we have to start thinking about, similarly to the way that we think that I started thinking about projections relatively early, was thinking about them in a range of outcomes. I think that the next step for 2025 in terms of the advancements of DFS, I think the main advancement should be, or at least one of the advancements that I'm going to put into place over at Paydirt, is a range of outcomes for ownership, where we talk a little bit and think more about ownership as not just a median expectation, but what we can expect based on something, right? I don't have an algorithm for it yet, but I think that that's a necessary change. And I think that having floor, median, and ceiling ownership projections and developing a range of outcomes within them is a really important step towards mitigating the damage that contest sims have caused towards ownership algorithms. Because ownership is the vital, most important thing in DFS these days. Having good ownership allows you to make considerably better decisions because everybody has projections. So we don't really need to care that much about the projections anymore. We need to care about the tools, and we need to care about the ownership. So that will lead into what I think is necessary in 2025 for DFS. But let's talk a little bit about sports betting. So the big tech advancement for sports betting in 2024, one was just people focusing a shit ton more on it. But the other big thing was having these tools like OddsShopper that, and OddsShopper has been around for a while, but it has really become popular in 2024 in that the ease of use of it has made it so anyone who subscribes to OddsShopper can be a winning bettor. Like literally anyone. The hard part about sports betting, and well, prop betting, we'll put it that way. The hard part about prop betting is being able to find the best line across whatever, right? And then also finding the edge relative to the lines that are offered and having good projections that you can then quickly and effectively and efficiently get that action down, right? Like the big thing is you want to be able to get your action down on whatever sports book has the best line based on your projections. And OddsShopper allows you to do that really, really easy and really, really seamlessly. And products like that have made it so the friction of being able to get down your action and get down like hundreds of bets in a day is ultra minimal. So long as you're at a desktop. On mobile, it's a little shakier still because like you have to go through 2-factor authentication and all that kind of bullshit. But like on a desktop, it has made the friction considerably less. And so that advancement has made it so people who are actually good at sports betting can now get down all the action that they could possibly want until they get limited and make really, really good ROI, make good money. And people who are even better at that can also then implement different ways to make sure that they have an understanding of where their action is on different sports books so they can mitigate getting limited. That's been the biggest advancement. And I think that we still have more room to go on that. I think that there should likely be ways to then implement ways to hedge. I think that one of the next things that's going to show up is going to be kind of like an arbitrage calculator and an arbitrage function built into this kind of stuff. So you can see, oh, well, here's my action. And then there will be a pop-up or something or like an option that says, this represents arbitrage based on this part of your portfolio. Do you want to take that? And then, obviously everybody should, because arbitrage is basically free money. But I think that we have a long way to go in terms of the tools that we're going to be able to use to beat sportsbooks. And what that's going to lead to, again, is sportsbooks that are going to, one, have to get much smarter about the lines that they put out. And two, are going to likely tighten their belts and limit winning bettors more. There's going to be a big war over the next 5 years for sports books against winning bettors. And we're, obviously we got to hope that winning bettors have their side represented well. But one way or another, that war is going to happen. And I think that it's likely going to be because of tools like OddsShopper that allow you to get down a lot of action with relatively low friction. Inputs to ownership within the Sims possible. Example with Henry and Taylor. If you thought would be the case beforehand, you could sim the other way. Absolutely. Yeah. The problem is that so from a super user perspective, that makes a lot of sense. From a me perspective for Paydirt, right? That's super fucking hard. Because you kind of have to trust the ownership algorithms in order to build a contest sim that runs in the back end, which a lot of them do. A lot of them are maintaining the data in the back end. And so changing the ownership projections changes the entire way the field is designed. So like the way that seed frames are built for Paydirt specifically, I can't give all the proprietary knowledge away, but the way that they're built is very sensitive to ownership. Like when you are creating a field to be used, you have to kind of have an understanding of what lineups are likely to be utilized within that field, and ownership affects those kind of things. So if you wanted to, after that, put in, an input of ownership and change those ownerships, yeah, you would be able to see the difference in edge that you would see, but that would simply just be that new input ownership minus the win rate within that seed frame that has been built on the information that was utilized before you input that ownership. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're asking that question, I think you likely that makes sense to you. But it's a hard question to answer. And I don't know that there is an actual answer to it outside of the way that contest sims were built for Paydirt before, the way the seed frames were built before. And we'll talk about Paydirt advancements here in a second. But the way that seed frames were built before was it was handled on the client side after you clicked run sims. So the seed frames were actually created based on the data that was held on the web browser. That's not the way that it works anymore for Paydirt. And I'm positive that that's not the way that it works for literally every single company. So in order to have that change be made, you would have to be able to run things on the web server, which is computationally fucked up. One of the biggest advancements that Paydirt made was avoiding that. So those are kind of the big advancements in tech, contest sims, and that ease of use of getting down a shit ton of action in sports betting. I think that some other things that we saw that were interesting advancements in terms of tech. I do think that we see the industry having a little bit better of an understanding of range of outcomes now. I still think that there are not enough companies that are taking it seriously. I think that we saw some drops in tech, right? I think that companies have kind of taken a back seat in the way that they are now projecting ownership, right? There are some companies that still do it very well, but those companies have to use a lot of manual input to do it. Ownership algorithms by themselves, I think, are taking a step back a little bit. But I think 2025, we're going to see some really nice advancements in terms of the way that people look at those ownership algorithms. And outside of that, I'm not really sure what tech advancements we can make in DFS right now. I'm building a tool right now that is a portfolio management tool that is going to be really, really good at projecting dupes and projecting finish rates. And those things are really, really useful and kind of like game changing. But I don't think that the rest of the industry is going to be doing stuff like that. The rest of the industry is still kind of depending on users just using what they put out rather than users inputting things themselves. So not sure what tech advancements we're going to see for DFS, if any. I think that 2025 is likely going to be a reshuffling. That being said, let's talk about that reshuffling. So still sticking on the industry at large thing, one of the other biggest things that we saw in 2024 was the RotoGrinders situation and kind of like the begin of the downfall of RotoGrinders. I made a video about this. It is my most popular video to date by a fucking large amount. But I was talking about RotoGrinders and their parent company, Better Collective, experiencing losses in the sports betting sectors and therefore cutting costs. And a lot of the costs that were cut came to RotoGrinders. We saw a mass exodus of mainly a lot of their corporate structure. I think that a lot of those guys got dropped. I know that they closed an office in Nashville and that guys are having to move to New York to go to their New York office. And we saw them let go a lot of their really, really high level trusted content creators because they were too expensive, right? We have seen the beginning of the end of RotoGrinders. And the reason why I say that, and that sounds doomy and gloomy, but the reason why I say that is because we've seen it before. We saw it with the Action Network. We saw it with Fantasy Labs. As soon as companies start cutting costs, it's a snowball effect because they lose trust and respect. And once you lose trust and respect in the DFS industry and in the sports betting industry, it's all downhill from there. Like, people start leaving and then companies have to cut more costs and then more things get cut and then more people leave. And it's just this vicious spiral downwards. And while RotoGrinders is likely still going to be valuable in 2025 and the tools are likely still going to be useful, I think that 2025, we are going to see them continue to lay off more people. I think that a lot of the people that you have come to know and love, like Squirrel Patrol, who's already been let go. We saw that Stevie PFL, who has literally the best NASCAR product in the industry, is no longer a full-time employee there. I think that we're going to see more people down the pipeline that are let go for their full-time positions. I think we're just going to continue to see a mass exodus of that. And I think by 2026, they're likely going to just be a tools platform. I'm not sure that they will even have content anymore in 2026 because content is expensive to produce. And RotoGrinders doesn't want things that are expensive. Well, Better Collective doesn't want things that are expensive to produce because it hurts their bottom line. So RotoGrinders is kind of on its way down. And that opened up the way that I related it was there's now just a massive whale's carcass on the beach. And there are a lot of companies that are going to be looking to take chunks out of that and take up the space that was left by RotoGrinders. And that space hasn't fully opened up yet, but we have seen parts of it open up. And I think that in 2026, we're likely going to see that space likely fully developed. And in 2025, my bet in 2025 is that RotoGrinders lets go of one of the biggest names in baseball content. And for NFL, I'll bet that they probably don't offer the blitz anymore. That's going to be my prediction here. Because they are looking to just cut costs as much as they can. Maybe they maintain the projection system whitelisting that they have, but I'm not sure. I think it's just going to go downhill pretty quick. Really quick question. You think anyone is building AI chatbot to help them interpret DFS data? So I actually was building that for Paydirt. The problem is I'm not super great at network security, and I got hacked. So I had to shut it down. But yes, I think that kind of stuff is happening. The way that I want to do it for Paydirt is actually not build an AI chatbot that helps them interpret DFS data, but can answer questions like I do. And I think that there's an opportunity for companies to be very smart about the way they do that. Like imagine at ETR, if you had a chatbot that was created that could sound like Dink, right? And answer 1v1s. That would free up Dink to do more important things than answer 1v1s and 2v2s and maintain kind of the integrity of how they distribute and work with their community. Granted, they don't work with the community all that much anyway, so maybe that's a bad example. But like companies who are very committed to, like maybe RPS is much more committed to interacting with their community on that kind of stuff. They could benefit a lot from an AI chatbot that is programmed to sound like their main content creators. Range of outcomes has been a game changer with Paydirt, NFL, NBA. NFL has been useful. Yeah, once you get used to working with a range of outcomes product like you have at Paydirt, you can never like go back to the original, just here's a median projection. So that's the RotoGrinder situation, right? I think that continues to get worse. There are some other companies that I think are now primed to grow and take portions of that pie, right? I think that the three biggest companies after RotoGrinders, because RotoGrinders is still likely the largest company, like the largest footprint, that's going to continue to drop considerably over the next year. But the next three are Stochastic, ETR, and RPS, right? Now, I say those three, and I exclude SaberSim from that because I don't necessarily look at SaberSim as the same kind of company. I think that Paydirt and SaberSim are much more alike than they are to RPS and ETR. And the reason for that is because of IP differences. And Stochastic, ETR, and RPS, they're not even really tech companies to me. What they are media companies to me. They are content producing companies that are looking to create content utilizing tools and projections to then lead people towards X, Y, or Z, right? So I think that is more of what RotoGrinders is currently and what RotoGrinders was, but RotoGrinders had the benefit of also having a shit ton of IP. And IP is intellectual property, right? It's tools they've created, optimizers, tools and models, right? ETR, RPS, and to a slightly lesser extent, Stochastic do not have the same depth of IP that RotoGrinders did, but they can grow into that, right? So I think that those three are the ones to watch in terms of growth, and I think that they are all positioned interestingly to take advantage of different things within DFS and sports betting. All three of them provide both DFS and sports betting content, right? But some of them do one considerably better than the other. I think that Stochastic, obviously, with OddsShopper and the affiliations that they have, is not only larger than RPS and ETR, but also positioned better to take up a large part of the pie that RotoGrinders left because of the way that they conduct business and because of the way that their business structure is set up. They are also positioned better in the sports betting stuff, right? Which I think is going to grow more. So Stochastic, I think, is going to become, the next RotoGrinders or whatever you want to call it. ETR and RPS are two sides of the same coin. They're the exact same company, just with different perspectives. RPS is kind of like the barstool version of ETR, and ETR is kind of the smart nerdy version of RPS, like that. But they are basically the same thing. So, like I said at the beginning of 2024, I thought that it was always going to be interesting to see which one grows over the other one. And I think that what we have seen a little bit is that ETR is growing a little bit better than ETR in terms of the modern way of producing content that people want to take in. And I also think that RPS has been a little bit more true to the way that they have developed their perspective. That's not to say that I think that ETR is doing a terrible job. I don't. I just think that they have, as a company that prides itself on being technically capable, I don't know that the perspective, or I don't know that the way that people interact with their company is really focused on that. And if it is, then they don't have the IP to sustain it. Like relying on third-party services for the way that they put together their IP doesn't really speak to the most technically competent version of that company, right? So RPS, on the other hand, they don't have the burden of being considered a tech-savvy company, right? They still have a whole bunch of really smart guys. They still have a really strong models and content, but they don't have the burden of being looked at as a company that should have IP. Like when you hear that they are partnered with SaberSim, people think, okay, yeah, I mean, RPS, like they need to have RP because they can't or won't develop themselves. When you hear that ETR is relying on the solver, that is something that when people hear that, they're like, oh, well, they should probably build their own. At least that's the way that I interpret it. And I think that's the way that a lot of people interpret it from the people that I talk to. So again, I think that it will be interesting to see which one of them takes the majority of the RotoGrinders pie that is going to be left over in 2025 and 2026. But those are the two, 2A, 2B companies. And then we have companies like Paydirt and companies like SaberSim that are not, I don't look at Paydirt or SaberSim necessarily as media companies. Like, yes, there's content to be consumed on both of them, but the vast majority of people use SaberSim and Paydirt for the tools and the models and the IP, of which both own considerably. So when I think about things like that, that there's other niche companies. I think there's a company called DFS Hero. There's a company called Ace Mind. Like there's other companies that are putting out cool tools for people to use, but that's kind of a completely separate idea. And in order to grow in those spaces, the thing that you have to prove is technical capability, first off, and innovation as a secondary thing. And the third thing, of course, and this is for the entirety of all of this, is accessibility. And so that's going to be the last thing I talk about in regards to kind of the state of the industry and how I look at things. It's getting too fucking expensive. It's getting way too expensive. For companies to be charging upwards of $500, $600, $700 per month for a suite of tools, for companies to be charging upwards of $100, $200, $300 a month simply for projection models, it's just too much. It's pricing out the majority customer, and it's pricing out a lot of the people who are interested in these things that just simply can't afford to be interested in them, right? Like DFS and sports betting used to be a little bit of a hobby. We used to be able to look at it, and I still kind of talk about it a little bit in a way of, here is that there are bettors that want to play for fun, and there are bettors that want to play, or there are players that want to play for fun, and there are players that want to play to make money, right? And then there's this whole spectrum between those two things, fun and money. And a lot of people, whether they know it or not, fall more into the I'm doing this for fun side of things, because the majority of people aren't going to make money doing it. not only are they not going to make money, they don't even know how to make money doing it. At Paydirt and with Blender and, with the theory DFS, we try to teach people how to make money with DFS, but like, it's hard. Most people aren't going to make money. So most people should accept that they are doing it for fun. Now, if you accept that as the main premise for the reason why people are playing DFS, and if you accept that as the main premise for the reason why people are getting into sports betting, it has to be accessible for them in order to maintain the idea that they are doing it for fun and not to make money, because the majority of these people are not going to have a positive ROI. At best, they'll be break even. Or the ROI that they maintain is going to be somewhere between like 1 and 5%, right? Fun prop bettors are going to make somewhere between 1 and 5% most of the time, annualized. So now think about the way that they are distributing that capital. If you have a 1 to 5%, let's just call it a 1% ROI, and you are playing with $1,000 a month, annualized, you're likely going to make $100 a month. How the fuck are they supposed to afford that while paying $200 a month for your product where you're just putting out projections? How are DFS players who at best push a 10% ROI, most DFS players are somewhere in the 1 to 3% ROI range, right? If they're winning players. How on earth are they supposed to afford that if they have to pay you $500 a month for your product? Like, there's one side of this that I understand. From a business perspective, you charge what the market will bear. Sure, fine, whatever. Like, if you want to treat the business that way, then you can. But you also have to understand that if you are charging people so much that they are going to go broke using your product, whether they play it right or not, you have to understand that you are doing more harm than good for your company in the long term. If you are charging every single person, $500 a month, and they are expected to make at best like $250 a month annualized, then that extra $250 a month, eventually it runs out. Like, eventually you just run out of money as a new player. They never have the opportunity to become good enough to then start realizing a positive expected value over the amount of money that they have to use to find that positive expected value. And this is just with one company, right? Like this would just be if one person was subscribing to a company that was charging them $200 a month, then they would only have to clear that in terms of ROI in order to experience a positive ROI, right? But most people are subscribing to 2, 3, 4, 5, however fucking many subscriptions just get stacked on top of each other. So what we end up having is if a company is charging $200 a month or $250 or $300 or $500 or whatever, and then another company is charging $200, $300, $400, $500, what you end up doing is like killing your own ecosystem. So the reason why I have Paydirt at $40 a month, and the most that I will ever raise it any given year is $5 more than that, is because I want it to be accessible. I want people who are just doing this as a hobby to be able to do it and find maybe a positive ROI and not die out and go broke because they're paying for my service. That goes double for companies that have to rely on third-party services to provide tools and IP, right? You see what I'm getting at on that? Like, if you are charging your consumers out of hand and home, you won't have consumers anymore. And what that ends up doing is making it so you have to charge more and more and more to the subscribers that are still there and the consumers that are still there. It's just a vicious cycle. So if we accept that the DFS player pool is likely stagnating or plateauing over the course of X, Y, or Z years, then you also have to be worried about the fact that companies are trying to charge more and more and more for their services, which will then end up lowering the player pool more and more and more and reducing the edge. It's a disservice to yourself and your company to charge these people significantly more money than they can possibly maintain an ROI. So that's kind of my rant on that. And I think that goes for the industry at large. it doesn't just go for DFS. It doesn't just go for sports betting, right? Like if you think that charging more money will save your company, because you don't have enough subscribers to maintain the growth or scale that you want to maintain, I would say that your product should be better rather than charging more money, because this at its core starts as a hobby for every single player. The vast majority of players do not come into this with an expectation of, well, with a reasonable expectation of being winning players. What they come into it is, I think this is a cool game and I would like to try it. And if in order to try it, they have to dedicate hundreds of dollars a month to being competitive, player pool dries up. So hopefully that strikes a chord with the industry a little bit. This video should be required viewing for any DFS player or sports bettor. Man, I hope so. That'd be cool. What if I got like millions of views on this video? Wouldn't that be sick? Okay, so that's industry at large. I think there's a lot of good things. I think there's some concerning things, obviously, but I think overall there's some good things. So let's talk a little bit about Paydirt now. Paydirt in 2024 took a lot of really cool steps forward, right? One of the things that Paydirt really pushed to do was making ease of use kind of ubiquitous with the platform. In 2023, Paydirt was much more difficult to use. A lot of the tools in 2023 and a lot of the research sheets and stuff like that, I'm actually going to do, which one should I use here? Nope, that makes me very small. That's kind of weird. That one just removes me entirely. What about this one? Nah, fuck it. We'll do this one. No, we won't. That looks weird. We'll go down here. A lot of what Paydirt did, no, I don't like that one either. A lot of what Paydirt did in 2024 was look to make it so the tools would not only run more consistently, but run faster. And a lot of what Paydirt did, and when I say Paydirt, understand I mean me. I built everything over at Paydirt. I do have help from Arturo, who's a friend who worked for Daily Roto. He's incredible. I do have a lot of help from him on the tech side in terms of maintaining data connections and data pipelines, stuff like that. But when it comes to IP and when it comes to how the site runs, all me. And everything that you see, every model, every research sheet is built by me. So what I focused on a lot with Paydirt was creating a database structure that would house the data and be able to parse it more effectively, which made the loading times considerably faster for a vast majority of the models. And I can show this because I have not made this adjustment for NHL for the betting tools. So the betting tools for NHL by themselves have taken a big step forward for Paydirt. But still, when you go to the betting tools, you can see 1, 2, 3. Took 3 seconds to load this, right? Oh no, all the colors are gone. But it takes 3 seconds to load that. And one of the things about that is because it was using a really slow query process, and it was not utilizing backend databases to do query maximization. When you compare that to the NBA betting tools, which have experienced this query maximization, it is instant, right? I didn't even have an opportunity to count to 1 there because the tools loaded basically instantly, right? That has been a significant improvement made to the Paydirt tools, is making it so that they are faster and more efficient. Another big thing is that one of the problems that we had in 2023 was that if you tried to load something like the NBA DFS models, right? One of the things that would happen sometimes if there was high traffic on the site was that it would hit a quota restriction, because the way that I was building out the tools and the way that I was maintaining the back end was it would have to do an API call against a Google machine, which has a quota limit of a certain amount every minute, right? Those have been largely removed entirely from the site with the database structure now. It costs me more to maintain that and to do things this way, but it is a considerably better product, right? Like things load incredibly fast now. Another big improvement that has been made is that when it comes to updates, the vast majority of the updates are now being done on the cloud or on a timer system that is ran on my local machine. So there are more updates, more consistent updates, and utilizing the updates through viewing the tools is a much easier and more consistent process. So those have been really, really big improvements. Some other things that I have done as well with Paydirt, when you go and subscribe, there are now specific sport packages, which are obviously like you should just get the all subscriber, the all access for $5 more a month. But if you only wanted NBA or NFL right now, you could do that. You could also do a week subscription or a daily subscription. And those have been really popular. And again, this kind of all goes back to the idea of accessibility. If somebody wants to play DFS because it's a hobby for them and they wanted to spend $5 for access to models for one day, fucking go for it. Like, I want you to be able to do that. I want you to be able to try the tools. I want you to be able to have access to things that can give you an edge and can make you competitive in this if it's a hobby. If it is something where you're trying to make money, there are options for that as well, right? Let's see, what other things have we done here? We have put together a newsletter. The newsletter was very popular. We have put it on pause for this month so that I can kind of refactor some things and think through a little bit more. We also have more consistent research sheets. We have research sheets that rival a lot of the things that you'll find in other dedicated research sites. Things like you can go to the game logs and correlations model for NBA, right? And if you have ever used Popcorn Machine, and I guess we can go to Popcorn Machine really quick to show this off. So if you go to Popcorn Machine, what you get is this, right? And you can go and you can see the game flow for this individual game. And it'll show you these kinds of things. And it'll show you some information about what happened in this. But the main reason why people use Popcorn Machine is so they can see the rotations, right? But the problem with Popcorn Machine is that after you have checked this, how do you check the last time that Indianapolis played a game? You have to go back to here. You have to find Indiana, again, somewhere. When was the last time? Here you go, Indianapolis versus Boston. And then open up another new tab for this. Whereas, with the way that I have put together this, instead, you can just look at Indiana and you can see the rotations for them based on any given game that you want to see, right? You could go here, you could go against OKC on the 26th, it'll load up. It's a much easier to use thing. This is another thing that I focused on Paydirt. I want to find things that people look for elsewhere on dedicated sites and say, I can do that better because I think that I can. So this is just one example, right? There are a lot of different things. We have added NCAAF and NCAAB, basketball and football, dedicated team level models and DFS models from Tribe, who's a content producer for Paydirt, which I'll talk about here in a sec, as well as American Numbers. That's Arturo. He's very good and helps me out. A couple of his models are available. Just steps up across the board, kind of in terms of the things that Paydirt has put together. And in 2025, one of the big focus that we're going to have is going to be on best ball. And best ball specific things and like snake drafts and underdog and prize picks and stuff like that, right? One of the big things that I have done for League of Legends is put together a tool that allows you to, and I don't actually know where this tool is. Hold on, I can go find it. But what it does is it allows you to put in information about a game and it builds out projections for that game for the different kinds of lines that are offered over at Underdog. I'll find this here in a second so that I just have to remember what the name is because I don't have it in the nav bar yet because I'm bad at maintaining a website. Let's see. We'll go view this. There you go. So this tool allows you to say, okay, here, what game do I want to look at? Say that T1 was facing DRX, right? Across best of 3. And we expect T1 to win game 1 and lose game 2 and then win game 3, right? We can then go run this. And then what that's going to show us is a lot of information about kills, death projections, assist projections, all that kind of stuff based on the matchup for individual games and then for the entire match by itself, right? So this is a super valuable thing if you're trying to beat projections that are offered by sportsbooks or underdog or pick'em sites, right? This gives us a lot of really important information about the way these games are going to happen. So I want to put a little bit more of a focus on this kind of thing, not necessarily projections that I build on the back end, but allowing people to utilize the data that I have in the back end and model things out in kind of a more simple way, so that they can have more control over the things they're looking at. Think about like with a baseball slate, right? Maybe you want to think about, you have two different scenarios. Maybe you have the Dodgers versus the Yankees, and we don't know who the starter is going to be. Is it going to be Blake Snell or is it going to be Michael King or something? And I'm naming pitchers off the top of my head. I don't remember if they both play for the Padres or the fucking Dodgers, whatever. Fuck you. But say you wanted to see, the Yankees against different pitchers. I want to be able to put that kind of stuff out so that people have an idea and a frame of reference on how teams would perform in different matchups so that they can get an idea of their range of outcomes based on a lot of different game scenarios rather than the game scenarios that we are just seeing. That kind of thing can also work for season long, right? Because then we can put together and say, here's what their schedule is going to be over the next week. Here are projections based on that schedule, right? I want to do stuff like that. But the big thing that I want to do is build out more stuff for best ball. And that's going to be the biggest focus for Paydirt over 2025 is we're going to have a suite of tools that is going to give you a lot of information about how to think about best ball without names and to think about optimizing things in a way that allows you to make more informed decisions without having to build out full projection models for it. And the reason for that is because I think that best ball as a concept is very cool, but I also think that it's just ridden with fucking variance. And anybody who projects out something that they think is going to happen, typically those things just are not, going to happen. And really quick while I'm on the concept, most people in the best ball stuff are just like, oh, here's the ADP. You can't go away from ADP. I have worked with a lot of people who have built a rankings or projection system that then heavily weigh it towards ADP because they think that it is considerably more valuable than the models or projections they're building. To which I say, just use your fucking projections. Take a stand, man. Like the whole thing about people thinking that ADP is God and the wisdom of the crowds is the way that we need to follow. I just disagree with that. I think especially when we think about the variance that we experience in best ball and season-long leagues, like it's 100 times the variance of GPPs. And if you were to tell anybody who's playing GPPs, oh, you have to use the highest owned players every single day, otherwise you're not competitive, that would be fucking stupid. So I think that we should think the same way about best ball. And the way that we're going to build out the best ball product is going to be more informative towards taking stands rather than just doing what everybody else wants to do. I think that there's a lot of edge in best ball if done that way. Now, that being said, the edge in best ball has to be experienced over a long fucking period of time. Anybody who wins any given best ball tournament may or may not be good at it. We have no fucking clue. We won't know for 100 years. But I want to make it so that if I was playing it, which I will in 2025, I would be playing it in a way that I think gives me edge over my competition and not just allows me to hold hands with them. Let's see, breaking ADP in a strategic way is how you win a mill. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, week 17 every single year is some fucking crazy ass thing that wins somebody $1 million. It wasn't ADP that won it for him. It wasn't ADP whatsoever that won it for him. So let's talk a little bit now about some business stuff for Paydirt. Okay. So I wanted to do this because I don't think that people do this very often. You never see this kind of thing in the industry, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Paydirt's financials. So Paydirt is my job. There are a lot of people in the industry who have other jobs or have other gigs or whatever. That's not me. Paydirt is all of my money. And it's how I support my family. And it's why I am so adamant about making sure that I put together a good product and I innovate and I don't fall behind. And it's also why I make sure that it's accessible and I take care of the people who support me. Because it truly is people who support me and my family and my son and make it so I can live the life that I do. I love and appreciate everybody who supports Paydirt, and I hope that everybody knows that. But that being said, I have to care a lot about the financials of Paydirt. So over the last year, Paydirt has made $105,000. That is the gross volume. The net volume is 100,000, and that is down about 3% compared to 2024. Now, that drop, I think, can be attributed to a couple different things, but the main thing is that the MLB season was a little bit lower than what I would have expected it to be, or what it was in 2024. Now, that being said, over the course of the last 5 years, Paydirt has continued to grow, right? Paydirt has gone from, in 2020, when we were like League of Legends and CSGO, and it was during the fucking pandemic breakdown, Paydirt maybe had 50 subscribers, I think. And it fluctuated between like 30 and 75. And then in 2021, it grew a little bit. And in 2022, it grew a lot. And then in 2023, it continued to grow. 2024 continued to grow in terms of different ways. So in 2023, I made a little bit more money, right? 3% more in terms of net volume. But in 2024, I have had more subscribers, right? I've had more interest in the site. I've had more traffic in the site. There have been a lot of things that have helped in terms of having me understand that there is a higher ceiling than what we are dealing with here. So the introduction of single day and weekly memberships, I think, has contributed the most to this drop in net volume. Because there are less people that are just getting the monthly or the yearly subscription. There are more people that are getting weekly and daily passes to try out the tools. And maybe there are some people who are, taking advantage of that, right? There's probably plenty of people who, for the NFL season, just get a day pass every Sunday, and it costs them $20 for the entire month. And it's half of the cost of what they would spend if they had a full month, right? Or 60% of the cost of if they had just like an NFL monthly subscription. But that's okay, because those people who do that then come through and are a consistent subscriber. I can count on a little bit more consistent revenue from people who like the tools enough to come back and get a day pass or a week pass, right? And those people, I always hope, convert into being monthly subscribers and jump up into that full out all access subscriber, right? I don't try to sell people other things on top of Paydirt. One of the things that I make sure that I do is I try to jam as much of the work that I do and as much of the IP that I produce into Paydirt. It's one of the reasons why this nav bar has grown so much, right? Like all of this different stuff, this all represents things that I have built for people to utilize. All of these different research tools are things that I have built for people to utilize. And when talking through that, remember how I mentioned that there are plenty of companies in the industry who tack on third-party subscriptions, right? Now, that's their prerogative, but that's not what I want to do. I want people who support Paydirt to find what I build and what I produce at Paydirt. One of the recent deviations from that, and not even a full deviation, is the partnership with OddsShopper, right? And the partnership with OddsShopper, when you subscribe to the Paydirt group over at Tails, that is a third-party subscription, right? But for Paydirt subscribers, it is a considerably lesser cost. If you are a Paydirt All Access subscriber, I don't want you to pay all that much extra to find things that I produce and content that I produce at another site. So I have made it so it costs like $14 a month for Paydirt All Access subscribers to then also go get a subscription over at Tails to find content made by the Paydirt group. If you are not a Paydirt All Access subscriber, there are coupon codes you can use to get a month off, but then it goes up to $40 a month, which is the same price that I charge for Paydirt. I don't want people to have to pay another 40 bucks a month for my tails expert picks, another $40 a month for X, Y, or Z, right? Like the only things that I do you can find Paydirt content elsewhere. You can find Paydirt content over at the solver, which are in the form of projections, because I don't want to build a fucking dedicated portfolio management system. I think that sounds fucking nightmarish. I don't like building optimizers. So I utilize my affiliation with them. You can find Paydirt projections over there, and you do have to pay an extra cost for that, but it is not a necessary core piece of the Paydirt experience. And then you can find Paydirt content over at Tails. Here, I am pointing at it here, for $14 a month if you are a Paydirt monthly all access subscriber or yearly all access subscriber, right? But that is, again, based on the mission statement for me, for Paydirt. I just don't want people to have to pay an arm and a leg so that they can't do this anymore for a hobby. So from a financial standpoint, as we are talking about this, something that I have not put out really into the ethos all that much is that Paydirt has taken on funding for 2025. Now Paydirt has investors, which is really, really cool. It's terrifying, to be honest with you. Up until this point, I have been playing with my own money, and it has been my own mistakes that would fuck up my financials. But now in 2025, if I fuck up, it's going to fuck up investor financials, right? So having investors kind of changes the way that I have to think about Paydirt as a business. One of the things that I'm trying to do is create better distribution channels for Paydirt, create more content that can reach through those distribution channels, right? We put a big emphasis into YouTube. We've put a big emphasis into trying to create podcast episodes and shorts and stuff like that, right? Like we're trying to figure out the best way to put content out there into the ecosystem that isn't kind of like the same kind of shit that you find everywhere else. Like it's not just like picks and plays, but picks and plays and here's the reason, or picks and plays, but also here's a way to find more leverage, right? Like we're trying to figure out ways to put together content in a way that maintains, again, the mission statement of Paydirt, which is accessibility of high-level models, while also giving people what they want in picks and props and plays and shit like that, right? Do I hate picks and props and plays? Yeah, kind of. I think that there are ways to be better about the way that I put those things together, but that is something that we are really focusing on. So, that's kind of the way that I look at Paydirt. One of the other things that I'm doing at Paydirt is putting together business to business type stuff. So, one of the things that I do for Fantasy Life, which I work with, is doing whitelisting for them, right? I whitelist projections and ownership over to their site based on Paydirt models. That business to business opportunity, I think, is really important for companies like Paydirt and SaberSim. Remember, I said earlier that there's a different way to grow companies like Paydirt and SaberSim. And I think the business to business is one of those really important things rather than business to consumer. So Paydirt looking for more opportunities to do whitelisting, consulting, and IP development. Those are three things that you're going to see in 2025. I have reached out to a couple different companies about working with them in those kinds of ways through Paydirt channels, right? Not necessarily as me as an individual. The work that I did in 2024 for Fantasy Life was as a consultant, but in 2025, that is going to be as Paydirt, right? So there's going to be a lot of growth for Paydirt. I think that we're going to see, at the very least, a double in revenue for Paydirt just through business to business channels and consolidation of the work that I do across the industry. But on top of that, I also want to see Paydirt be more recognized as a legitimate player in the industry. And in that light, I don't think that Paydirt competes with ETR and RPS and Stochastic. What I think that it looks like is something more as a more accessible version of SaberSim. Because I think that when people go to SaberSim, they are doing the same kinds of things that they are doing at Paydirt. Now, do I think that Paydirt can also put together media and content and stuff like that? Absolutely, and we're going to try. But I think that the core competency of Paydirt is tools, models, and high-end availability that people have access to, right? That make them competitive in DFS and sports betting, so that they can take it from a hobby to something that they make money for. That's what everybody wants to do when they start playing DFS. So, that's kind of how I look at things, how I look at how 2024 has gone, and how I think 2025 should go. I think that the industry is going to continue to saturate a bit. There will be a lot of consolidation in 2025. That kind of thing happens in every single industry, especially when you have a player like RotoGrinders end up leaking a lot of that market share. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of room for growth in both DFS and sports betting, and eventually the cross section of the two. I think that there are going to be some really interesting things to do in terms of sports betting cross-reference with DFS and vice versa, thinking about the way that you have your DFS action and your sports betting action. How can you connect those two things and maximize the returns from both in a way that depends on both? So that's that, right? I'll take some questions and I'll talk a little bit about kind of the way that Paydirt is done, and maybe I'll show off a little bit of this tool that I am building. But yeah. So does Paydirt project Showdown as well? We do. We absolutely do. So I don't have the NFL Paydirt stuff up right now, but I should have NBA right. Nah, I don't have it up right now, but I do project out I do end up projecting Showdown as well. You can find that stuff in the models and tools. I'll share my screen again really quick. So you can find both contest sims, right? NFL Showdown contest simulations, and an RO and optimizer. So projections in terms of range of outcomes and an optimizer and contest simulations. The contest simulations has been fucking nails for NFL since I made a switch that prioritizes salary a little bit more in captains. It's been fucking nails. You can ask anybody in the Discord or anybody who uses the tools. Really, really good. I also have Showdown content for NBA based on the most popular showdowns for NBA that day. I am working on expanding that a little bit. I'd like to be able to offer Showdown models for every single Showdown contest that is available, but it requires some network channels that I haven't quite dug into. So that stuff, again, in 2025, working on accessibility and usability. So that'll be another thing that I focus on a lot. And then one tool that I am building right now that I think is worth showing off, since we're talking about Paydirt right now, is going to be a portfolio manager. And so this portfolio manager, like I said, this is not quite done yet, so please take it with a grain of salt. But what you're going to be able to do is insert a portfolio and some projections. And this is just ETR projections from yesterday. And then get some ideas and data about those lineups, right? So what we're going to be able to see is, like, when we look at Showdown, just take a look at flagship size, right? What we can do is we can see what the win rate is for individual lineups, what the expected finishing percentile is going to be for those lineups, the projected dupes for those lineups, and then also the edge that the lineups represent based on the finishing percentile, win rate, and amount of dupes that we expect on lineups. I think that people will recognize a couple of these things from the theory of DFS, right? Dupe projection is going to be the thing that I think people use this the most for, Showdown and MMA specifically. But I think that things like finishing percentiles and lineup edge and win rate are also going to be really popular for classic contests, right? Having an idea of which lineups have the best edge for an NBA slate, for instance, right? That can be really, really powerful. Win rates for classic contests for things like MLB, NBA, NFL, also really, really powerful. Finishing percentiles, I think, is the most powerful part about this, right? For those that don't think about finishing percentiles often, the finishing percentile for a lineup, right? If you finish in the top 1%, it means that you finish in the top 1% of all lineups, and that's where most of the money is made. Technically the 0.1%, but the top 1% is what we want to aim for. So if you can, and what I am trying to do, figure out a way to project the average finishing percentile for lineups. And like I said, this math isn't finalized yet. But if you can figure out a way to project out the average finishing percentile for lineups and the win rate, what you can do is you can figure out a way to then say these lineups are the best because they have a average finishing percentile in the top 5% or so, and a win rate that is strong based on the median projection. So therefore, the edge is really, really high. Like last night, based on ETR projections and optimals, Jaden Daniels captain with Bijan Robinson, Brian Robinson, Zach Ertz, Tyler Algier, and Jeremy McNichols had the highest overall lineup edge because it didn't project to have any dupes in the flagship. The finishing percentile was in the top 3.5%, and the win rate was one of the highest at 0.14%. So this is really cool to know, right? Like if you were going to enter one lineup, that's likely the lineup that it should have been. Or you could have decided to choose, if you wanted to sort this by median, right? And say, okay, I just want to see all the lineups that have a max of 10 projected dupes and have a finishing percentile in the top 10%. If you did that, then you would open this up and you'd say, okay, what lineups do I want to use? These lineups have some negative edge. Here's one with positive edge: Jaden Daniels, Bijan Robinson, Brian Robinson, Zach Ertz, Commanders defense, and Jeremy McNichols. Sounds good, right? Like that could be a lineup that you would use. Or this one that has really good edge, which is the one that we talked about before, the one that I pointed out. So this is something that I think is going to be really, really powerful. And I thought that I would show it off right now. It's not done yet. Like I said, I've been testing. I reached out to some industry guys for some of their lineups, so that I could test with a wider subset of lineups. But yeah, I think it's going to be pretty cool. Do I intend to provide coaching sessions again? Kind of. So yes and no. I plan to provide coaching classes. I plan to provide kind of more bulk stuff, classes and courses, and here's how you do X, Y, or Z, right? That will be a la carte. But for subscribers, right, like we should do once a month, here is a class session where we can talk any questions, we can talk about these things. And then Fridays, what I want to do is I want to have an industry player on. Think like Ship My Money or Jesse is Dead, or Squirrel Patrol, like really, really good players. I want to have them on, and then also have a novice or amateur player that wants to learn. And I'm going to call it Pros and Joes. And it's going to be on Fridays. And we're going to talk together and work together on building a lineup or lineups in optimizers or using tools or whatever, right? So yeah, there's going to be, we're going to continue. One of the things with Paydirt is trying to focus on making people better. But we're going to continue to have opportunities to do something akin to coaching. It might not be one-on-one. I'm really busy now. I had to shut down my coaching, specifically my coaching opportunities, because I just didn't have time to manage them. And I don't think that with the schedule that we have for 2025, I don't think that I'm going to have more time, right? But I do think that there's going to be another big focus on helping people get better. Okay, lineup clumping. So yes, I want to say yes, but that's going to require a lot of testing, right? Like that might not be available until baseball season, right? We're going to have to figure out a lot of things of testing with NBA Showdown, with that kind of stuff, right? I think that there's going to be a lot of things like lineup clumping and combinatorial ownership and trimming and stuff like that, like taking a lot of the concepts that we have taught at Theory DFS. I want to kind of put that all together in a tool that is easy to use on Paydirt. So yes and no, but it's going to be one of those things where I have to work with people, right? I have to work with people as consultants that are using this tool and have a high idea of how to do these things, a high level of knowledge to help me build these things in a way that is going to be usable. And that's going to be where industry pros come in and help me with ideas on this stuff. So yes, I think that I am going to have that, but that's kind of one of those higher level concepts that is a lot harder to do than just the math that I'm putting into this for win rates and edge rates and stuff like that. And this answers this question from earlier as well, right? Of talking about lineup clumping and optimizers. The thing with lineup clumping is the combinatorial ownership and the parity within lineups, right? Like you don't want all of your Aaron Judge to be tied to the catcher for the Yankees, right? Like you want to have a good separation of the players. And what that means is that you want to have groups that are set up. And groups in a way that are saying, for this set of lineups, I want to avoid this set of players. And for this set of lineups, I want to avoid this set of players. And I'm not sure that that is something that you do in a tool like the portfolio manager that I'm building. That might be something that you do after you have gone through with the portfolio manager and said, here are the combos that I'm getting the most consistent of, and then go back to the optimizer, set your rules to avoid those things, and then upload it into the portfolio manager, right? So I think that it's kind of going to be a back and forth thing. But maybe there's a way that I can figure out how to do it in the portfolio manager. Maybe I set up a way to re-optimize in the portfolio manager. I don't fucking want to do that, to be clear. I don't want to build an optimizer. I fucking hate building optimizers. I say it all the time. But maybe we do. Maybe we do. Will there be a new sub price that includes the class, or will it come with monthly sub price? It will come with the monthly sub price. Like I said, I'm not big on charging people extra for things. If I am providing some sort of service, I want it to be accessible and I want it to be included in the sub prices that are available for the entirety of the overarching of the site. That being said, maybe the sub price goes from 40 to 45. I am not sure yet on that. I don't think that it will. We will see. I don't think that it will. But if I go to some free agent that is a content creator in the industry and say, hey, I want you to be at Paydirt full time, and they're like, okay, well, pay me $10,000 a month and I'll do it. And I'm like, oh, well, fuck, okay. I might have to raise the price for that a little bit. But we'll see. Regardless, anything that is in terms of classes or coaching, that stuff will be included in whatever the monthly sub price is, which will likely be $40 a month, but we'll see. Anyway, this has been all of this stuff, right? I hope this was interesting. I want to do more of this stuff in 2025. I want to talk more about the industry at large. I want to talk more about kind of like overarching concepts and industry and business and stuff like that. And I hope people found this interesting. If you didn't, or if you hate me, then that's cool too. I don't think that many people hate me, but maybe you do. Maybe you hated this. And what I will say is, fuck you. You should think better. If you have thought that any of this was interesting, though, and you want to go take a look at what Paydirt has to offer, then you should go do that. It's paydirtdfs.com. If you're not part of the Discord, it is free to join. You can find the link over at paydirtdfs.com. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube, you should do that. You can find that at YouTube. I don't know, wherever the fuck you're watching this, I guess. And thank you guys for tuning in. Again, thank you so much for all the support that you bring to Paydirt. Like I said, it literally supports my family. It allows my child to live a life that I could only hope he can continue to live forever. And that is a very important thing to me. So thank you guys so much for the support. And here is to a successful 2025.